use the Michael Fowler Centre and the Town Hall, which has been closed for a number of years now. But given Michael Fowler Centre is now confirmed to be earthquake prone, we have to be careful not to assume that any delay or change in decision about the Town Hall is going to be compensated for by the availability of the Michael Fowler Centre venue. Right, next slide please. So a bit of a recap on the factors driving costs. Since the briefing in mid-2022, the work on the site has focused on the excavation of the auditorium basement, including sheet piling and dewatering, the pile installation around the perimeter, including installing base isolators. And I think we've already publicly said that the piles around the perimeter have been installed, but we were around 25% through the piling in the auditorium, and also structural strengthening works. And a significant number of risks have eventuated through this time. Ground conditions worse than expected, the extent of temporary works, ongoing discovery in the old heritage building of conditions worse than expected, such as contamination, asbestos in difficult to reach places, various unforeseen risks emerging around the entire Civic Square and their connection to this project, impact on scope as a result of seismic outcomes, impacting on customer and tenant experience, and the consequential impacts from the above, meaning time, more cost, and ongoing regular adjustments to design and construction methodology. So these things combined have driven the requirement for an increase in budget. That is a significant one. Next slide. So I'm going to soon hand over to the team to take you through the detail, but the reason we're having this briefing today, we would normally have probably one significant briefing before a big decision of the council, but this is a complex issue and it's been evolving quite quickly since we commissioned some independent review. So we briefed you on the 3rd of October based on the information which was arising through the independent review that RCP were undertaking, and we've now received their final report. When the Town Hall costs started to escalate earlier this year, we took a number of steps in order to ensure that our oversight and management of the project was what it needed to be, and to ensure that we understood fully all of the risks and therefore the solutions and advice we could bring to you. So one of the things I did do was dedicate a member of the executive leadership team as the senior responsible officer for the entire development of Te Ngākau Civic Square, and that is our Chief Operating Officer, James Roberts. We also undertook an internal review of the program against tenant and other venue user needs. We commissioned an external legal review of contract implementation that was undertaken by a very experienced commercial barrister, and I released that document to the council last week in full. It will be appended to the report that we are sending out through the council agenda later today, but with some redactions in terms of protecting the confidentiality of some of our commercial partners. And then the RCP external review of the entire program and costs, which will also be released in full with our report today. We'll also include the more detailed schedule of cost estimates that form the total that we have advised you on in terms of the range of potential outcomes we will have here. So you will be receiving a lot of information and advice from this work through the council paper going out to you today to support you to make a decision. One of the things that I've been asked a few times is why do we have to make this decision now? Can we not delay this decision? My strong advice to you is that you will be provided with all of the information you need to make a decision. It's really important that we provide certainty for the project team around the way forward, because every day in delay, giving us clarity about what we are able to do, what we are empowered to do, will add more time and cost to this project. We will need additional funding this year, and it will be very difficult for the team to continue knowing what they are enabled and empowered to do without your decision. So that is my strong advice to you. Next slide. Thank you, James. So now I'm going to hand over to our Chief Operating Officer, James Roberts. Thank you, James.
Kia ora, Barbara. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. So there's a number of slides I'm going to go through today. I will endeavour to get finished within about 20 plus minutes, so that there's plenty of time for questions at the end. There's obviously more information in this briefing than there was in the last one, and some of that is related to some of the feedback you've given us around areas that you'd like a little bit more detail. I thought I'd start by talking about the RCP project review. And just for your information, RCP is an independent construction project management company with a significant track record in New Zealand. They have not been involved in the Town Hall project up until the point in time where I asked them to come in and give me a really good, solid understanding of what we need to do to get from where we are today to the completion of this project. The reason I wanted to use RCP is because I'm also obviously across the Te Marapihi Library project as well. And having just been to a monthly project board meeting this morning on Te Marapihi, I can tell you that the project is blazing green, on track, on budget, and we have a good level of confidence on that particular project. It's going well. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why that is different to the Town Hall project, but certainly having RCP engaged in that project has been one of the strengths of its success to date. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask RCP to get across and have a look at the Town Hall project. So basically the purpose was to consider the project's costs and completion date and make recommendations about improvements to give us greater reassurance, and also for you to have some independent advice from council officers, basically independent from council officers. The key conclusions from the report are basically as written on the slide. To bring certainty to time and cost, it's really critical that all remaining scope and design details are agreed and are done so as soon as possible. And as we talked about last time we did the briefing, there are a number of areas around the basement, the integration to MOB, and the way that we're using elements of the building that we're asking for clarity from council on those, or agreement from council on our recommendations for those. Those are all critical elements of scope and design that need to be finalised as soon as possible in order not to cause any further delays. The second point is around the scope of the heritage work stream. It's a big piece of work for this particular site. From a scale perspective, it's nowhere near the same size of work and risk as a lot of the groundworks have been up to this point in time, but nonetheless, there's still a large element of unknown across the heritage scope. So RCP pointed out that we really do need to get good, thorough understanding of what is required to make good on the heritage elements of the building inside. And their thinking and analysis has been built into the estimates that we've already put down in front of you and we'll go back through today. Third point is, again, as we mentioned last time, the project has generated a huge number of contract instructions and requests for information. And just as a reminder, this is where the builder has been asked to do something. He's gone and approached a piece of the building and it's not quite as was detailed and he was expecting, based on the designs, etc., that have come through from the design and consultant part of the project. So when that happens, a CI or an RFI is generated. This particular project has had extremely high number of those, and there is a large backlog outstanding of CIs and RFIs that need to be worked through. Until those are resolved, there is a level of uncertainty around a price that stays there, and also in a level of uncertainty around time. So it's a key point from RCP that we really need to work out how we can rapidly get through that backlog. And they did also note that some of the changes that have been made over the last few months as we've been facing into these problems are starting to pay some fruit, or pay some dividends, sorry, on that one, in that we are now attacking that backlog. The fourth point is around the construction program, and while the RCP didn't do a deep dive into Naylor Love's program, generally speaking, their findings is quite appropriate. The way that that's being managed is quite appropriate. That was also evident from the Hugh Kittle review as well, which was the paper that we sent out last week. However, in order for the construction project to work, it's really important that the scope items that are still outstanding that I mentioned above are resolved as soon as possible. The fifth point is an interesting one because there are elements of a project that sometimes can be not missed or not thought about, but kind of put aside to the end of the project to think about in a level of detail. And there are some elements like that that exist on this project. One is the reinstatement of the organ. Another is general fixtures, furniture and equipment, or FF&E. The installation of the tenant packages and the training of staff to run the venue, etc. So those are things that sometimes can be left to the end. There's some really important elements in that, particularly around the organ, that we really do need to think about planning for and building into the time frame now, and that will ultimately save us time and de-risk the project as it gets towards the end of the time. As you're probably aware, the town hall organ, it's not your dad's Wurlitzer, right? It's a big, complex piece of equipment. It will probably take around 6 months to reinstate it. It needs completely clean conditions in the building to do it. So timing it with the completion of construction activity there's a little bit of art that needs to be applied to how we set up that piece of the program. So what RCP is saying is, like, plan that in now. Don't leave it any longer. The sixth point around program and costs, there is still a level of uncertainty, and as we've said all along, there is risk on this project that will stay right through to the end of the project, and in particular around completion of the basement works, the fit out, the organ, as I mentioned, and the heritage, and then getting through that RFI or CI backlog, as I mentioned before. So a general contingency of unknown unknowns needs to be kept within the program, and we have got that. And so the numbers and timeframes we've presented include some elements of contingency and timing risk associated with unknown unknowns. And then finally, RCP conclude that in terms of the range of costs, which we'll come to in a later slide, but are basically as represented in the previous briefing, they believe the mid-range cost and timing should be achievable. Right, that's what we should be aiming for. We'll obviously aim for the low-end one, the faster one, and the cheaper one, but realistically, the mid-range cost and timing estimate is the one that should be achievable, and that is their view, having had a good think and good look through all the elements of this project and what's outstanding, and talking to all of the relevant stakeholders. However, if we don't follow some of the advice and guidance from RCP, then there is the possibility of going to the upper end of the estimates. So specific actions coming from that review, one, obviously initiate a process to close out all of those contract variations and instructions, and we are doing that. Second is explore a possibility of fixed pricing portions of the remaining scope where we're able to and where we have a better understanding, and that's obviously a negotiation between us and the contractor if we're able to achieve that. Third is really about unlocking construction workflow, resolving items and decisions that are on hold, like some of those scope questions that we've had, to open up more work sites, and then we can get more work getting done in parallel. That will help speed things up. I spoke about the organ installation and making sure that we bring that clearly into the scope and we build that into the plan. The next point is around prioritising the completion of Town Hall above anything else that we're doing in the precinct, and that's an important point to consider, because there are plenty of other things going on in that precinct, or need to go on within that precinct. As you know, we've been doing various different seismic assessments and geotech assessments of various elements within the precinct. Some of those will need to be addressed sooner rather than later, but it's important within the midst of all of that we keep focused on getting the Town Hall project done as per its timeframe. Finalising the remaining design changes to enable final pricing on those scope items I mentioned before. And there is also a recommendation that we improve the visibility of issues to the project board and the escalation process to the project board, so that we can more rapidly resolve some of the construction issues and scope issues that are remaining. And so that's something that we've also already actually put in place. And finally, focus the stakeholder engagement on minimising further change and ensuring continuity, alignment on scope and timing. So in other words, from this point forward, we don't want to see any more change, ideally, at all. And that is completely achievable, and we have had those discussions with the various different stakeholders in this project. Sorry. So just to recap, Barbara mentioned some of these actions that we've already taken to date. We put a little bit more executive level oversight across all of these projects related to Tanako and the integration elements of those. We have made sure that the internal review of the program against the tenant and venues user needs has been done, and that has highlighted some of those challenges within the building and how we're using the building that were triggered by the lack of ability to continue to rely on buildings like MFC. We did the external legal review of the contract implementation, and we've now completed the RCP review of the program and costs. So our additional actions really are implement those RCP recommendations. I do advocate strongly that we bring RCP in to support the leadership of this project. Another adjustment that we intend to make is to create a Tanako Program Management Board, which will sit across the entire program. Personally, I feel we have a very effective program board on Te Matapihi. There is a lot of external expertise that we have on that program board on Te Matapihi, and I see that we can get great value by leveraging that across the rest of Tanako. And I've spoken to most of the board members on the Te Matapihi board, and they're all in agreement that actually the picture for Te Matapihi would be positively supplemented with an understanding of what else is going on across Tanako and Town Hall. So I think it's a good win for us to put that in place, and I think that will give also you as councillors a greater level of assurity that we've got the right visibility with independent viewpoints across this project. And lastly, we believe we should increase frequency of reporting and the depth of reporting to the Environment and Infrastructure Committee on the full Tanako program. So now just going through the options, which we did present last time, but obviously there's a little bit more detail this time. So option one, which is what we're recommending, is to increase funding and complete the project. But to take the feasible opportunities that we have to offset some of the high range of cost that we presented. And that is primarily around leveraging private development on the MOB site, the municipal office building site, to deliver the integration that is required to make the town hall functional. And also we can save some further costs if we look at the opportunity to align a delivery of functionality in the mob space with the town hall opening. So if we get a private developer involved in working through the mob replacement or renovation and the integration of the town hall, the recommendation is that we open the town hall when that piece of work's finished. Because if we open the town hall prior to that, there'll be a temporary piece of work that we have to do as well, okay? So we also recommending that we rework the footprint of the building to provide greater flexibility for venue use and reduce the reliance on MFC, that we implement all the RCP recommendations, and that we establish the new Tanako board to govern the whole program. And I will intend to supplement the Tanako board with additional capability from the construction sector as well. The other option, which has multiple elements within it, which we're not recommending, is to close the building and consider next steps. And basically, that option breaks down into kind of three main elements, one of which has got three different pathways. So the first element, explore demolition, and that would need to be done via one of three pathways, either resource consent for demolition, a district plan change to delist the town hall from its heritage status, or a local members bill that potentially would enable us to override other regulation that we are working under. The second element of option 2 is to consider or look at opportunities for additional funding. And the third one is to pause the project and just take some time out and have a think about what we might do with an option to restart in the future. None of those items under option 2 we're recommending, and I'll go through that in some detail. But first of all, option 1, the recommended option, is to commit in principle to a fund increase of up to 147 million across the following years, as we have detailed on the slide, noting that some of that money is actually required this financial year because we are really at a point now where we need to make commitments, irrespective of what the decision from council is, for work that needs to be done this financial year. Absolutely to seek all opportunities to offset this cost and reduce the additional funding required by up to 64.9 million, depending on which particular risk scenario we're looking at. The saving of 64.9 million would require private development of the mob site to integrate with Town Hall, delay in Town Hall opening to align with that private development on the mob site, and the medium risk scenario playing out over the remainder of the project, which, as RCP said, is eminently achievable. Beyond these factors, there are no real choices available to us that would have a meaningful impact on costs, while still ensuring a workable venue. And just recapping something I mentioned before, we are pursuing any available opportunity to manage cost with the contractor, but obviously that's all subject to negotiation. Some of the ideas that we're talking to the contractor about are staged work packages, some reallocation of risk, and a negotiated lump sum settlement of past contract instructions to provide cost certainty. So what does that look like in a picture? So this table here has the low risk, the medium risk, and the high risk scenarios in columns, and the consequential budget increase that each of those would require. And the three lines refer to the top line being council funds everything, including the work on mob. So if we were to do that, so we weren't able to get a private developer to do that piece of work on mob and council funded it, that's what is represented in that top line. The next line down is if a private developer does the work on mob. And as we said last time, we have had reasonably detailed conversations with at least two parties, and so we believe it is feasible that we're able to progress a deal with a private developer to do that work. And the lower line, which we think is the most realistic and the option we should be targeting, is private development for the mob work, and that we delay the opening of Town Hall until the mob work is done, so that we avoid any further temporary work that we would need to have in place prior to the opening of mob. So therefore, if you look at the medium risk scenario, which RCP thinks is the most realistic, that would be a total cost for the project of 264.2 million, or a $81.8 million increase from the current budget. So just to help illuminate the piece that I talked to around mob and the integration into mob, so the yellow part is the looking from Wakefield Street. It's the left-hand side or the west side of Town Hall, so that is yellowed out there. It's that piece there that integrates into the building that is that we currently call Mob, on that space of land there. And the design of this venue requires space within that Mob footprint to fulfil a number of the requirements for the space, including space for people to congregate in between and during and after, or before and after events, for washroom and toilet facilities, and for refreshment facilities as well. The block on the northern side of the picture that's called Temporary, that is the piece of work that we would need to do if we open Town Hall prior to the work on that Mob site being done. Okay, so if we opened Town Hall, we hadn't done the work on the Mob site, we were waiting for that to complete, we would need to provide temporary facilities for toilets, some storage, and some space for hospitality. So that's the piece I mean when I say if we line up the completion dates of the two, then you wouldn't need to do that temporary piece. Another picture, this is inside, this is actually the Merrill Suite area within the building. So what we're advocating here is that that is repurposed from being a Merrill Suite to being a space that facilitates the use of the venue in terms of the staff working on events, and security, including security staff as well, but would also leave space for what's called VIP rooms, which can be used for civic engagement type events, can be used for the talent when they're in between or at the beginning of a show, and various other purposes as well. But that's our current recommendation. If we were not able to use that space that way, we would definitely have a problem with space for venues operations staff, security staff, and some of the workspace required to set up and pull down events. So just a little bit more detail on the recommended Mob integration. So there's two ways of doing this. One is, in essence, to demolish Mob and build something new, and the other is to strengthen Mob. And in terms of conversations we've had with development parties, either could be feasible at this point, and we would need to go through a detailed procurement process in order to bottom out the reality of these two different options. So demolish Mob and new build. So demolition of Mob was consulted on as a preferred option in the 2131 LTP. And there is some funding has been incorporated into the current LTP for demolition. A new build would incorporate the town hall facilities that I mentioned and talked about, and when we were looking at the picture. We kind of label it an annex or an extension. It's basically those facilities of the town hall that I said need to be on that Mob footprint. And really only that allows us to actually meet the requirements of it to operate as a proper venue. We have spoken to developers. There is genuine interest in doing this, and what we now need to do really is explore timeframes explore the option with parties that are interested, and as part of that, obviously, the timeframes and how well that could align with the opening and completion of the town hall. The strengthen Mob option, so basically would be a strengthening of the building. As part of that project, we would look to provide integration with the town hall for the elements that I mentioned before. So obviously it's not just a matter of just strengthening the Mob building, you then have to do that integration of the two buildings together. As I said, there is some developer interest in this option. It's a relatively high level, the level of investigation that's been done there so far. We would certainly be looking for a lot more certainty on that being a viable option before progressing with it. But just to note that, a strengthening of Mob could experience the same time cost challenges as the town hall, and it was one of the reasons that we moved away from that option as a recommendation in the 2131 LTP. So I just want you to be fully aware that there's a lot of unknowns around that option, all right? Okay, so option 2, close up. There is significant sunk costs, or would be significant sunk costs, and I'll go through this in detail. There's $204 million. That's in essence what it would cost us if we were to close up. The total cost of the project to close up would be 204. And it would require work pretty much through to the end of 2024 in order to actually safely and securely to close up the building. It creates significant uncertainty over the building's future because any paths towards regulatory changes and approvals or funding, identifying funding sources would be extremely uncertain, and they would be out of our control to a large extent. We feel there'd be a significant reputational impact of leaving the project in a state of closed up, reputational impact on council, and lack of confidence in our ability to continue to deliver future projects that are important to the city. If we did want to restart later, it may be difficult to find contractors who are willing to enter into a new contract with the council that looks any different from the current one we've got, which is us taking all the risk. We feel that there would be an impact on confidence in the city, and it would undermine us in our ability to attract events, investments, students and participants in the creative sector, etc., and potentially put at risk our ability to retain key institutions such as NZSO. We feel that a closed-up building would potentially generate poor social and on-street outcomes, and we've seen that across a number of other closed-up buildings in the city. There is definitely contractual risk for council with the lead contractor and key tenants under the agreements that we've signed and contracts that we've signed. And if we got into the space of no certainty around the town hall and a need to close MFC within the next few years in order to deal with its earthquake-prone status, then Wellington would be left without a significant operative concert venue. So the $204 million cost to close up the building, this chart talks to those. They've already spent approximately $139 million and have in-play commitments to another 9.3. To close it up safely would probably be around about another $33 million. That's our best estimates at the moment. Okay, and both our independent QS and RCP have been through these estimates as well. There's outstanding professional fees to consultants that we would be up for of $9 million. If we were to attempt to vary the resource consent, well, which we would have to do in order to close it up, including public notification, there is a cost to that. And then there are estimated contractual damages of around $12.7 million, which comes to $204 million. And just to note that every year there's a delay in restarting. There's obviously an inflationary impact to costs of completing the project. Additionally, if we did get permission to demolish the building, there would be a demolition cost involved as well of approximately just under $40 million. There is quite a complicated process for us to go to, which I'll get into, and I might actually go to that before and come back to this slide. But if you can just remember that number 39.35 and the 204, we go over to this page. So in essence, the cost comparison to close the building, $204 million, to demolish approximately $40 million. So ultimately, if we didn't continue with the project and we looked at a different option, which ultimately was going to result in a demolition, we'd be looking at about $243 million to do that. Whereas if you can recall, our medium risk scenario to complete the project is $264 million and high risk $288 million. So the difference between completing the project and closing it and seeking a demolition, the difference between those two in total cost to the council would be around about $20 to $40 million. Okay, demolition pathways. I might need to call on some additional expert advice to go through this, but anyway, there's a lot of good notes on these slides, which you'll get afterwards. and there's only so much additional information I can give you, so I'll probably just talk through what's on the page, and then we'll go to questions. We think demolition is highly unlikely to be feasible, considering the regulatory and legal steps required to get there. And we also feel it would take probably a good 3 years to actually get through the process, and it is quite uncertain as to where that process will end up. And it could be at that point in time you end up having to restart the project at a higher cost. We believe an LTP consultation is needed to change from the Council's currently preferred option to a new preferred option to demolish. And consultation should include analysis to show that it was a reasonably practicable option, which would include meeting the district plan test that there were no reasonable alternatives. So these are the kind of regulatory requirements that we're working under when considering these decisions. All pathways under this option have considerable reputational and precedent impacts for heritage across New Zealand. So the first pathway, just recapping again, resource consent for demolition. Application for consent for demolition would need to be prepared. We would seek direct referral to the Environment Court. The application would need to demonstrate no reasonable alternative to demolition, and the high cost of strengthening and finishing the project is unlikely to meet the threshold of no reasonable alternatives. Second pathway, delist the town hall through the district plan change. We believe that can't be done through the current district plan change process, as it has not been raised in submissions or hearings. It's highly likely to be challenged, particularly in light of the situation with Gordon Wilson Flats and a similar process being done around that. And the Gordon Wilson Flats were not on the New Zealand Heritage List at the time, but they were found to have significant heritage value and couldn't be delisted. And the third pathway is a local members bill, similar level of uncertainty as the resource consent and plans change processes, and we could spend several years in a parliamentary process with no certainty about timeframe as well. So if you can just, in order to help you find your bearings in this, sorry, just bear with me for a moment. If you remember, I said option 1 was recommended increase funding and complete the project. Option 2, which is not recommended, was close up the building and consider next steps. Of those next steps, exploring demolition via one of 3 pathways was the first one. The second one was explore new funding, and the third one was pause with option to restart. So I'm now on the second one. Seek funding. The second and third ones, actually. Seek funding or restart later. So seeking help from central government or simply pausing and pursuing other possible avenues basically has all the disadvantages of closing up the building, plus an additional high degree of uncertainty about whether any funding agreement could actually be reached. It would take time to explore this option. There is no guaranteed outcome, and ultimately may leave council with a higher future cost to complete the project if we're unsuccessful in pursuing that avenue. Through the project to date, the impact of cost escalation is quite clear. And any decision to delay completion of the building will only result in a high and avoidable cost, and that's why one of the reasons that we're really pressing for certainty when you make this decision next week, that we get real certainty as to next steps, because anything other than certainty is guaranteed to create additional cost on and above what we have laid out. In fact, what we suggest is that rather than engaging with government on this project, maybe the council could use it as a compelling case study to explore wider legislative or policy change or new funding tools that help resolve the tension and complexity between protecting local and national heritage and addressing the problems of earthquake-prone buildings. Thank you.
Kia ora, James, and just for the benefit of our live stream viewers, that was James Roberts, our Chief Operating Officer, who is responsible for this project. Thank you, James. Very comprehensive. Just on our question list, I'll just go in order so you know your Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Young, Councillor Winera, Councillor Brown, then Councillor Abduraman. Councillor Young, we'll go straight to you, and I've got you, Councillor Pennant, too.
Right, well, good morning, everybody. So my concern really, lots of concerns, but my question is around Michael Fowler Centre. I feel we're dancing around the edge of the future of the Michael Fowler Centre. Is the reality that we will be demolishing it? Contemplating its demolition?
We've still got further work to do to assess the different options for Michael Fowler Centre. So we don't really have a good enough picture to be able to provide that advice to you at this point in time. But we know we need to do something, and we know it's unlikely to be a low cost.
There would be some irony in a mayor that demolished so much of Wellington. The building named after him got demolished. Just saying. So the second question is around the organ installation. So just going back to the slide where you mentioned it, don't find the slide, but you said it would be handed over to, not RCP, to the contractors to install. Is that what you said?
No, what we would do is the program of work the contractor has at the moment doesn't include that piece of work. So that's the idea, is that we would add that to the contractor's piece of work. Tell me if I'm wrong here, Peter. Right. Thank you. And that would enable the contractor then to think very carefully and plan out in detail the steps necessary to get that organ back in, amidst the requirements of moving and reinstalling it, which require having a completely clean area to be able to do that, because it's obviously uses a lot of air, that particular organ, a lot of pipes and stuff. So there is a quite a complicated process of putting that back in place. And it's really important that that's done in deep integration with the builder completing the building, and working out the ideal paths to complete the work on the space where the organ needs to be put in, sooner ideally than maybe finishing some other parts. So in other words, trying to do it in parallel. So it's really important that we integrate those two together for that purpose.
But the actual installation will be done by the South Island Organ Company, because they're the only specialists in New Zealand.
100% correct. I can't tell you exactly who the contractor is, but it's not the builder, correct? It's a specialist organ company, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. End of my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Winera.
Kia ora, team. Two from me. First one, I was just a bit confused. Is the preferred mob option to demo or to strengthen? I understand that it was previously to demo in the previous LTP. What is it now? Sorry.
So yeah, the previous LTP was demolish.
Yeah.
But we have investigated all options as part of this exercise as well. And so we have had an approach from at least one developer who believes there may be an option to strengthen the mob building.
Okay.
But there's a level of detail we need to work through with that developer and any other developers and our consultants, etc., to see whether or not that's genuinely viable.
So is it correct to say that the demolition option has been explored far more thoroughly than any potential strengthening option? Is that right?
We recommended the demolition option because the strengthening option back in the 2021 LTP timeframe was considered to be way too expensive.
Yeah.
To actually strengthen it, in terms of the commercial return on the building that was possible and achievable, and level of funding required.
Okay. All right, I might move on. The other one was, could I just get an indication of what kind of $10 million temporary works would have to go into place if we were to open the town hall prior to the completion of whatever happens to mob?
Sure, yeah. So that's that space on the northern side of the town hall, actually in the square itself. That red piece that was on that diagram, I'm not sure, maybe I can bring it up again for you, sorry. So that, you see that red piece on the diagram there?
I see.
Yeah. So in essence, the facilities that would go into that mob space would be as well as space for people to actually congregate, there is a hospitality element, there is a storage element, and there are toilets. So without those things, it's difficult for the town hall to operate, right? So if we finish the town hall and we have to wait a couple of years for the construction to finish on mob, if we want to open the town hall in advance of that mob work, we would have to build that temporary piece there.
I understand. Okay, sweet. Cheers.
Thanks for the presentation. I've got a reasonable number of sort of detailed questions, but I'll follow them up in due course, really, because we've got another week, haven't we? But my one observation, and which is also a question, is my confidence in being able to actually sign off the proposal, which, you know, it looks like by far the best proposal as opposed to the two alternatives, rests very heavily on the calibre of the people who are actually, you know, we're relying on for the advice. So I would like to know more, not necessarily today, but I'd like to know more about who RCP are. You know, I don't know anything about them and what their track record is and what sort of expertise they are going to be bringing to the table. And I would like to know who the project managers are going to be for us. So, I've been involved in enough construction projects to know that stability of project leadership is utterly critical. When I've been involved in projects where that hasn't happened, and they've almost inevitably ended up being a disaster. And I would like to know the membership of the governance board to make sure that they have the sort of skill set that I think that obviously a project of this level of complexity requires. So they're more points on notice, if you like, than questions, because obviously it's quite a broad brush, if you like.
Can I just say, through you, Chair, we can provide more information, but the selection of RCP was very deliberate because of their nationally respected expertise in not only structural engineering but heritage building structural engineering, and they are expert advisors on the reconstruction of the Christchurch Cathedral, for example. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any direct questions you may have, given they're in the room.
They want to give us some specific examples of other like projects which they've been involved in, because that would be very helpful.
Hi, I'm Helen Ewing from RCP. We will obviously come back to you with a bit more detail because there's a long list of questions, some of which will probably require some context around organisational structure, which needs to be engaged with the team before we fire back. In terms of our expertise and our experience, we're a nationwide project management consultancy. We've been around for circa 25 years. Our inception arose out of the key delivery partners that were delivering Sky Tower. So off the back of that, the formation of a New Zealand business for RCP, which had previously existed over in Australia, hence their involvement in the Australian construction of the Sky Tower building. In terms of our specific experience working on heritage buildings or working on large complex projects, we were involved heavily in the Christchurch Arts Centre, the seismic strengthening, isolation project and rebuild down there. We've been involved quite heavily in a lot of the projects post the Christchurch earthquakes and the rebuilds, Christchurch Cathedral being one of those. And we're also working on a number of heritage buildings in Auckland and have been involved in the delivery of a few heritage performance buildings as well. So in terms of the individuals involved, both Scott and I have a lot of experience working in quite complex seismic strengthening environments, both of us being structural engineers by training. We've also worked on a lot of complex stakeholder engagement projects and worked with and adjacent to Naylor Love on a couple of key such seismic strengthening buildings over the years. In terms of our nationwide expertise, we have a big history in New Zealand of independent project management consultancies being one of the first businesses in the country to be such. In terms of specific details, I think we'll probably defer to providing you a bit of a summary, but if you have any further questions, feel free to volley them across to us now.
Well, just one tiny follow-up one. So what actually will you be doing on this project?
The specifics are probably being developed in conjunction with Wellington City Council, but our first suggestion was to essentially assist in establishing the key recommendations in our report. So helping to establish and bolster the existing delivery team. As per your previous comment of there's an importance in having people involved in the project that are there from the beginning and there through to the end. So we're by no means suggesting that you toss out the existing delivery team. There are elements of the delivery team that we should be complementing, bolstering and strengthening to provide that consistency and to build on their existing knowledge and their existing skill sets and experience with this building. But a lot of the things that we're proposing to implement are to try and accelerate the way in which we respond to and address the site-specific issues in unlocking information to enable construction. So some of the key challenges on site at the moment are because it's an existing fabric and because every detail is slightly different, there's a real need to accelerate and understand and instruct clear directions and answers to resolve the issues that are addressed before they become a delay to delivery. So providing, and that's a time-consuming activity, and providing that energy and that expertise and that drive alongside the project team to help quickly resolve issues and unlock delivery and unlock construction activity. That's one of the key activities that we see as being beneficial for the team to complement the existing delivery. That's just a minor example, but included within our report are a bunch of specific recommendations, and the idea is to establish the framework to transition from where they are now to impart and put in place the recommendations and ensure that that delivery continues to accelerate and avoid any further delay. We're no singular silver bullet. We're not suggesting that instant changes will create the solution.
Thanks. Just one tiny little follow-up question, actually, if I may, is, I mean, obviously the basement work has been a pretty major disaster for the project. I'm guessing from the figures here that it's cost us about $50 million. Is there any other unknown, threat that this project has? We've got estimates of risk which are obviously quite substantial, but is there anything when you look at it that you think there's one more bolt from the blue out there that could really nail this project? I mean, is there anything that we would really could sort of cause a shock down the track?
Yeah, so I'm Scott from RCP, so obviously helping Helen on this project. Look, to be honest, this project, the foundation and groundwork has been a huge part of the risk of the project. That's coming to an end. We've done a detailed review with the team in terms of working out the full risk register and looking at all of the different risks in the project. Nothing on that register is as big as the foundation works, but there still are reasonable risks. We talked about heritage being one of them, and there are a few other things to kind of work through in our report. But yeah, most of the difficult stuff in the ground and in the temporary works is coming to the end of its life in the project.
Kia ora. I'm just going to take just a minute. We have got quite a few questions, so I'm just requesting that we may need to go over for 10 to 15 minutes to accommodate. If any councillors do need to leave earlier, let me know and I'll try and put you at the top of the list. Next we have Councillor Abdurrahman and then after Councillor Pennant.
Kia ora, team. My question would be regards to process-wise. If we consult on a lot of things with the community when it comes to decision making, I know we got a mandate to make a decision in this area, but why we can't put this as a part of the long-term plan to consult with the community, putting those options forward instead of voting on them now?
So I think there's a kind of a pragmatic and practical response to that, which is that we really need certainty now to avoid continuing kind of delay and cost increase, right? Whereas the LTP consultation, I think, is going to be April-May timeframe next year. So that'd be quite a significant further delay and uncertainty that we'd leave. In essence, we'd almost have to kind of pause the project. And as I said, to do that would be quite expensive. But I don't. Would you like another more detail on why or why not? Why we would or would not consult?
Well, basically what I'm asking is it would be good to get a community mandate. Of course, we are elected officials making a decision, but in this area, we are spending significant amount of money. Last year when I was door knocking for council, I remember some of the community members even not happy with the $100 million. Now we are increasing in such a significant way. So having the community mandate would be a good way to go forward. So that is, and plus the project review personally I think should have been taken place last year, but now here we are. Maybe that is why we need to have community consultation as well.
Perhaps through you, Chair, I'll make a further comment. So when the council made the decision in 2019 to embark on this project, it had a strong community mandate. It had undertaken its special consultative procedure under the Local Government Act. There was, in fact, a lot of community pressure. And the risks of entering into the project were well articulated at that time. The one risk no one anticipated was the pandemic. That has added to the pressure on this project, undoubtedly. But the reality is you are now in the middle of a project and it's unpalatable, but I don't think it is a real option for you to delay, because what you will do is cause a significant increase in cost. It would work against the council's responsibility to be a prudent financial manager, which is also a legal obligation you have. And our strong advice is that the truly practicable option is to confront the reality that this project is with us and it's going to cost more than any of us would have hoped. You're getting the best possible advice. In terms of your comment that this review could have happened sooner, a number of reviews have continued to happen through the course of this project. There has been good practice project oversight from the outset with a project management governance board with independent people advising it, including an ongoing member of PwC sitting on that board. And the previous reviews, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, formed the advice we last gave to the council on an increase in budget. The project has tried very hard to remain within that scope of budget, and it is only in the last several months that it has become clearer that that was not going to be possible, and the prudent and practical actions of a good management team have been undertaken with very strong expert independent advice. Therefore, bringing that all together for you now to form our advice to you as quickly as we could, bearing in mind that I have only just received the final RCP report within this week. As soon as we had the core advice from RCP, we advised you. So I totally understand this is very difficult for the council, but it is unfortunately the reality that we have in front of us.
Question that would be like, how much will it cost delaying until next year, you know, if we decide to go to consultation, how much will it cost?
So without being able to have any certainty over next steps, in essence, you're in essence selecting the pause option. So, and we've outlined the cost of the pause option being approximately $204 million in total. If then, because that work would take through to the end of 2024, if you then got halfway through that and then said, no, restart and carry on, we would have at least lost 6 months of time, and time is money on this particular contract. Secondly, we would have done work that almost certainly will need to be undone as a result. And third, we won't have started work that needs to be started now in order to minimise some of our inherent risks that's still sitting there. So I couldn't give you an actual number, but it's a very unpalatable situation from a financial perspective.
Councillor Pannett, then Councillor Calvert.
Thank you, team. We've done a really thorough job there, from my perspective. I just wanted to pick up that last point about lobbying government around heritage and the costs of earthquake strengthening. So I don't understand the point entirely. Are you saying that you would think it was better to demolish it, or are you saying that the requirements shouldn't be as strong, although they're only set to a moderate earthquake, as I'm sure you know? And do you also accept that there are many buildings which are earthquake prone and they are costing every owner a lot of money?
Yeah, I think that's the point, that if we feel as a city that this is not the kind of project that can be repeated, given that we have significant heritage buildings and we have significant earthquake risk, there is a high likelihood that there's going to be other buildings which will be as a result, very expensive to remediate. So maybe, and if we look at the different options available to us under regulation, etc., then we're reasonably limited. So maybe there is a case to make, looking more broadly across the city and potentially across the country, that the policy settings between heritage, earthquake strengthening, planning regulation, etc., maybe there needs to be some kind of readjustment, because otherwise this is generating very expensive projects for cities to undertake.
Yeah, so just one last question though. You do accept that most buildings on our list set by national legislation are not heritage, and the money is big that we're talking about.
Councillor Panic, can I just say that we do have a briefing for the council later this year on the wider issue of the seismic risks of the capital city. The point that the staff are making today is that in protecting the heritage places and buildings of New Zealand, balancing that with our regulatory obligations to meet building code seismically and in other ways, that there is a nationwide conversation to be had about that, and that's a sensible one to have with central government. Wellington is saying here we have a case study example of the real challenge of meeting those requirements with the funding tools available to local government. So it also brings into play that wider conversation about the funding tools available to local government to look after the nation's heritage and the nation's infrastructure. And I think that's a very big topic, probably for another day.
Yeah, and just to close that off, I just don't want heritage to be blamed for costs. That was all. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. Councillor Calvert, then Councillor Randall.
Thank you. It's only now that you've said that you've needed the mob building because, in March this year, you're asking us to pay to demolish it. It wasn't included in the last uptake. So just interested to know why, after all these years, you now need space in mob.
So the space in mob was always there in the original designs. There was a level of uncertainty created for this particular project when the decision or the recommendation in the 2131 LTP was to demolish it. And there's been a level of uncertainty sitting around this project ever since in terms of exactly how to finish off the project and meet the requirements of a functioning venue without certainty around what's happening with mob. So that's one of the things that we've been trying to close out, is let's get certainty on that particular project, and that will enable us then to close out the remaining scope and risks on that part of Town Hall.
So could you tell us have you got an option where we don't need the space in mob?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, there's the temporary works that's in that picture there on the left-hand side. But I suspect my colleagues, from a design perspective, would not think that that is a great end state to stay with, quite frankly.
Could I just add, so you might recall in the longer history of this project, at one point the mob building was going to both accommodate this extension of the town hall into its space for venue purposes, but also be the accommodation, the office accommodation for the National Music Centre, both in Victoria University and NZSO. And one of the reasons that did not proceed was it became apparent that the costs of seismically upgrading the building and its implications for the actual commercial per square rental were beyond the means of the potential tenants, and the council decided it was uneconomic. A lot of the work at that time went into considering alternative office accommodation for the National Music Centre, but it has taken time to clarify, which is the internal venues operating review we said we'd undertaken over the last several months, what it meant in terms of the functionality of the town hall as a concert venue. And that's the clarity we're giving you as part of this advice.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just curious to understand is why it's just that now we're being told that you need to have this other space when in June last year we weren't, and all that was required was a demolition of the annex. I think it was 5.9 million in that budget. But I'll ask more specific questions on that through the things. What I'm interested to know is, were you in the papers, were you reflect on how this impacts on the council's overall debt limits or debt levels?
I think in our last briefing, Councillor Calvert, our CFO certainly spoke to that. I'm not sure she's here. Oh, she.
No, I understand that. I just want to know whether that will be in the papers when you're talking about the financial aspects, whether you will talk about how that fits into the overall debt situation of council.
Yes, we can certainly comment on that in the report.
Okay. And just third question, has there been a program governance review at all?
Can I just speak to
no,
the program governance, just to be clear, because I think there's a bit of confusion about the word governance. Now, good project management practice, which we adhere to within Wellington City Council, would see what we call a governance board overseeing the actual project. So there's a project director, project management, a technical specialist team, and then you have a qualified project governance oversight, which is appointed by the Chief Executive under delegation from the Council in managing the projects in the Council's program. And in our case, I have been satisfied that the governance board has been at the right level of senior management and expert independent advice through PwC, through quantity surveyors, through engineers. What James is saying to you today is that in overseeing the entire development of Te Ngākau Civic Square, we want to integrate the project governance boards of Te Matapihi and the Town Hall so that we have one integrated view of all of the interconnected components of Te Ngākau.
I understand that, but my simple answer would be no. There hasn't been a review, independent review.
If you mean an independent review, certainly RCP's review has looked at the way we've managed the project, and secondly, the report we released to you last week from the commercial barrister commented on the way in which the project management and governance was working together to manage the project. And as you know, his conclusions were that the balance of management approach was as it should be.
Thank you.
Councillor Randall, then Councillor Chung. I'm just noting we're creeping up time-wise, so I'll just get some information. Yes, so I've got Councillor O'Neill and Matthews after Councillor Chung.
Okay, thank you. First of all, just more of a comment. Thank you for taking us through this. It's a complicated story. I think you've done quite well to explain it. Obviously, these are total costs, and so certainly important to get some more detail, as even outlined in the previous paper. So hopefully that can be provided in the short term to at least to councillors. I know there may be some confidential information amongst the detailed costs, but high-level numbers is really writing a blank check. We need to know where they're going. Just some questions are, first of all, is the change in earthquake standards affected the cost of the building?
Probably not. The type of construction, or the regulation changes in 2016-17 affected more precast type buildings, whereas town halls in situ concrete. So maybe a little bit, but not that much.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, in terms of the cost breakdown, could you outline how much of the costs in these estimates is contingency? Because there's a very wide range of costs. And I know this as a high-risk project, it's always had quite a high contingency factor. But inside these costs, could you give us an idea about how much of these costs is actually contingency and how much is base estimate? I mean, are you working like at a 30% contingency, 50%?
The contingencies factored on or developed on two things. Number one is risk. So effectively, the risk register gets priced, and that is included as a contingency amount within forecasts. And then on top of that, a general percentage is applied for the unknown unknowns. We can break that out as a separate number about how much, I guess, is carried broadly in contingency. So it's hard to answer as a specific percentage on those ranges right now, but we could.
So in the top line figure of 329.1 million, you don't have an idea of how much of that is contingency?
Not off the top of my head, but it's made up of various contingencies assigned to different items. And again, that's based off the risk register, which makes, putting at this point in time, defining a general percentage quite difficult.
Can I just say there will be more detailed costings in the report you're receiving later today. There will be a schedule of the breakdown of costs of the total estimates we've provided you.
Okay, thank you. In the previous briefing, it was outlined there were some potentially other costs also with the wider site. I'm thinking particularly the basement area. Does this cost cover the potential costs for sorting out that area? And sorting out that area still need to be done?
Go for it. Yeah.
The cost for sort of strengthening other elements like the hasn't been included, but there has been some risk allowances included within the project to respond to those other conditions. So, for instance, if some of those perceived risks, some mitigations have been developed and costs put around those mitigations to allow the project to navigate in consideration of what's on the horizon there.
Okay. And lastly, if
Councillor Rendell, so apologies, that was your third, so would you mind if we moved on? Sure. Thank you. Councillor Chung.
Thanks very much for this. I actually have 5 questions, each of which can be answered with one word. The first question is, you're talking about the backlog. Does this mean that, and we're catching up with the backlog, does this mean that we're actually behind schedule on what we're doing?
No, not necessarily. Sorry, it's not a one-word answer, Councillor, but no, it doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means that there is a bunch of work outstanding that we know is there, but has not been thoroughly costed yet.
Great, thanks. Second one is, does the council have any target date for completion? Like, do you have something that you want to actually have by a particular date? Is that affecting what we're actually doing?
The target date really is when practically can we actually complete the project, and that's actually in the RCP report. So when you get a copy of that, you'll be able to see that and some recommendations about what that date should be. So there isn't a date that we have set. Hey, it must be finished by this day. It's more like, well, how quickly what's the most optimal speed with which we can get this work done, and what does that opening date then look like?
Excellent, thanks. Third question. We've actually installed 140 to 160 foundation piles around the building, mainly on the walls, and we're also doing sheet foundations. Has that been completed, or is that still continuing?
Sheet piling's been completed. The piling in the auditorium is not completed. Yep.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Councillor Chung, I'll put you back on the list.
Well,
it won't take long.
There's one word answers. Sorry, one word question.
Thank you. You're doing well, but I'll put you back on the list. Councillor O'Neill and then Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. Noting our obligations under the heritage classification, and one of the options you've spoke about reworking the footprint of the building, what are the other opportunities that we can do to kind of sweat the upgrade a little bit or scale back on our obligations while still adhering to heritage?
It's potentially reducing the level of finishes in some areas. So, and that's currently being explored or currently being value engineered.
Oh, cool. Sorry, second partai. When do you think we will have kind of any clarity or certainty around those options, noting we're making a decision soon?
I guess that's, there's in the delivery of projects, often there's focus on the critical paths. Right now, those elements aren't on the critical path, i.e. We want to focus on giving the contractor direction on the items which will make it, which would otherwise result in costs which could be avoided. So we're working to, it's an area of focus, but not number one priority right now.
Councillor Matthews, then Councillor Foon, or Deputy Mayor Foon.
Talking about yourself in the third person. So my question is, I want to circle back to Councillor Abdurrahman's question, but I want to know what our options are for doing some public consultation, even if it is not in line with the long-term plan, and even if it required some bridging funding in order for work to continue while we heard from the public.
I think at this stage I might invite our General Counsel to comment, so you do understand, because I think your current decision gives you limited opportunity.
Kia ora, councillors. Yes, I've looked at this quite closely in relation to what your consultation obligations are, and my recommendation is that you do not need to consult further. There is no legal obligation to consult here, notwithstanding that this is a high significance decision. The key thing you need to be aware of is turning your minds to the views of affected people.
Oh, sorry, to be clear, it wasn't that I thought we had any obligation to consult. I have a desire to consult.
Yeah, and my advice on that is I do not advise you to delay this decision. Any time spent consulting with the community will not change the problem in front of you and will extend the likely cost of that problem. Unfortunately, because I know you know how strongly we feel about community views. We find ourselves in the middle of a project where the horse has bolted essentially, and we have a difficult situation that we need to front up to and address. So while normally if we were at the front end of a project we'd definitely want to undertake, we would have to undertake consultation. In this case we have an obligation to make a decision that is going to have the least cost impact, is my advice. Beth might wish to add to that, so.
No, only that I think that's rational in terms of your decision making. So you can choose not to consult based on these factors, including the fact that you have an in-flight project and that it is going to have significant cost impacts to then halt and consult.
I'd just like to indicate, and it doesn't have to be now, but I would like some advice about how the cost would be impacted, say, by a 2 to 3 week consultation process, and if there was any need to allocate additional bridge funding while we did that.
Kia ora, thank you colleagues for the questions. Most of mine have been answered bar one. Just regarding the mob building, if we do look to work with a developer to strengthen that, have we had a look at the ground underneath, and are they fully aware of the conditions that the town hall has had to go through in order to do a similar, will it be a similar project? Like, will they need to elevate the building? Okay, big nods from the back, yep.
Yeah, I'm not aware that in any detailed geotechnical assessment and piling assessment underneath mob has been done.
So currently a site-wide geotechnical assessment's been produced for Tanaka, which takes into account the projects underway, plus there's some further, I guess, desktop analysis that's being undertaken. There's been no invasive investigations on the mob site, as far as I'm aware, that would give us high level of confidence of the performance of that soil. You could, be reasonable to assume that it's got similar characteristics to to an extent of the town hall site. So there is a reasonable amount of risk, I guess, is what I'm saying, on that site that would occur if you were to try and or strengthen the building or strengthen the foundations of mob. So it represents a pretty high risk under a strengthening scenario.
So just to recall, was there an analysis of time frame if the option in the strengthen mob option?
No, because if we So what we really need to do now is we need to, on the assumption that council was to continue with the project, we would then enter into a procurement process with the market on the site, the MobCab sites, and as part of that process, we would be driving to get greater certainty on the viability of any option that was put on the table. So whether it be a strengthen or a replace option. So, and as Peter says, I think the lesson that we've had from Town Hall is that we really, really would like to feel quite certain about the risk of strengthening that building before we entered into that kind of agreement.
Great. And third question on that, would council be required to make a decision further on what happens with the mob building? Because do we need to undo the decision we've made to demolish, which is where it stands at the moment?
So if we then did a RFP process, we would aim to have that completed in the first quarter of calendar 24, and then whatever the recommendation is, or options and recommendation, we will bring back to council.
Yep. We have a few more minutes if we go to one, so we'll do Councillor Randall and Councillor Chung, and that should wrap us up for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just for other councillors and the public's point of view, just want to note that option 1 recommendation spending is to spend $14 million further, or to put budget for $14 million further to take us through to June 2024. And then the $330 million is for subsequent years. Is that correct? So that's my question. My question is, if we take option 2, and I'm really reluctant to ask this, but I just want to know, can we also have a evaluation of what the site would be worth?
Okay, so just to try and clarify a little bit on the money that you were mentioning in your first question, Councillor. So what we said in option 1 on the page here is worst case scenario budget increase is $147 million. If you were to take that, that's the high risk council pays for everything option, and broke it down by which planning years it would be required in, or which financial years that would be required in. There is $14 million required in this current financial year, and then the rest is split out over the next 4 years.
Can I just add also, in case that gives the impression that we don't need to make a decision on the years beyond the current annual plan, that's not the case, because we would be stuck not knowing what design work we needed to do, not what planning we needed to do, what provision we needed to make. So it is important we know now. What the phasing does do is give you the opportunity, though, as more information comes to light and we work hard to keep the costs at the lower end of the range, then those things can be updated. But we need to indicate that phased budgeting process in order for the project team to know what it's doing. And if it doesn't know what comes beyond this year, it doesn't know what it's doing. Because what we're doing is mapping out a project work that takes us to a successful opening early 2027 or sooner if we can achieve it, right?
Correct, yes. And if we don't get it phasing right by year, we end up in that carry forward scenario. So.
We've got 1 minute to go. Councillor Chung, go with your one answer question.
Thank you. The recording studio, can you tell me how much incremental cost there is in installing that studio into the basement?
So that's part of the tenant fit out for NZSO, so they're paying for that.
Okay, great, thanks. And my last question is very easy. Could we have a site visit before we actually have to vote on this?
Between now and next Wednesday?
Yep.
Of course.
Thank you.
Wonderful answer, James. Okay, so That wraps us up for today. Can I just thank everybody for coming in? We know that your time is really important, and thanks for going over. Thanks, councillors, for you being here today. And those questions were great questions. So what we do need to do is we've got a long weekend ahead with the decision to be made on Wednesday. So we are suggesting that if you could get questions in by Friday afternoon, that would be helpful for us to get responses back by more of a midday Tuesday. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Can I just ask, because we did raise some questions and we know we need some more information. Is somebody going away to come back to us on what a community engagement or community consultation would look like, or we could possibly consider? Is that going to, can we have some officer advice on that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Councillor Calvert?
Well, it's really just aligning myself to my Labour comrades here, which is about the second time in a week, which isn't really unheard of. But yeah. But can we get some advice on, if we decided to seek community feedback, what that could look like? I'm not talking about a formal consultation. I'm talking either some engagement, a survey, something. How could that be done? And yeah, that would be helpful.
We can give advice in the report that will go out to you today. The question is whether it changes the nature of the problem we have and the advice we would give you, which I suspect is caught in the current situation of reality, of cost, of we're in a pretty difficult situation here.
Kia ora. Once again, mihi nui to everybody for being here today. Later or tomorrow? Doesn't matter. I don't know. Okay. Kia ora.